The night Marcus Vane walked into Rosewood Steakhouse, even the candles seemed to dim. That was the thing nobody ever talked about afterward. Not the screaming, not the shattered wine glass, not the way security materialized from nowhere, like smoke given human form. What they remembered, the ones who'd been sitting in that dining room on a Tuesday night in November, was the silence that fell before any of it happened. A silence that had weight, a silence with teeth. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because before Marcus Vane walked through those mahogany doors, there was Lily Chen. And before we talk about what happened to Lily Chen that night, you need to understand one thing. She was the kind of person who apologized when someone else bumped into her. 22 years old, 5'3" in her sensible black work flats, a nursing student by day, and a weekend waitress at Rosewood by financial necessity. She had the kind of face that made strangers feel inexplicably safe, open, earnest, a little tired around the eyes in that specific way of someone who studies until 2 in the morning and still shows up to work with a smile. She did not deserve what Craig Ashworth did to her that night. Nobody does. Rosewood Steakhouse occupied the ground floor of the Hargrove building on 5th and Clement, the kind of place where a glass of wine cost more than Lily's hourly wage, and the breadbasket arrived before the menus like a small act of theater. The clientele were what you'd expect. Old money, new money, people who wanted other people to know they had money. Lily had learned to read the room in her 8 months working there. She knew which tables needed more attention and which ones needed to be left alone to breathe. She knew who would tip well and who would run her back and forth for extra lemon before leaving 17%. Craig Ashworth, she'd known the moment he walked in, was going to be a problem. He came in with a group of 4, 2 other men in suits, and a woman who kept checking her phone with the focused attention of someone who desperately wanted to be somewhere else. Craig was the loudest of them, mid-30s, the kind of good-looking that had curdled slightly with ego, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Lily's monthly rent. He was a regional sales director at a pharmaceutical company. She'd learn later, though he introduced himself to people as being in pharmaceuticals, the way people say they're in entertainment, when they want you to fill in the blank yourself. Lily took their orders. Craig ordered his steak rare, paused, and then said, "Actually, make that medium rare. Do you know the difference?" He looked directly at her when he said it. "Yes, sir," she said, and smiled and wrote it down. The problem started 40 minutes later. The steak came out medium, not medium rare. The kitchen was slammed that night. A private party in the back room, 3 tables of 8, a new line cook who was still finding his rhythm. Mistakes happened. In the 8 months Lily had worked at Rosewood, she'd dealt with kitchen errors before. She always handled it the same way. Acknowledge, apologize, offer to correct it, make it right. She set the plate down in front of Craig, noticed the color of the cut immediately, and had already begun to form the words. "I'm so sorry, sir. I can see that's not right. Let me take that back for you." When Craig picked up his knife and fork, cut into the center of the steak, stared at it for a long moment, and then set his silverware down with a deliberate theatrical clatter. The conversation at his table stopped. "This," he said, pointing at the plate with 2 fingers like he was presenting evidence, "is not what I ordered." "You're absolutely right, and I sincerely apologize," Lily said, reaching for the plate. "I'll have it corrected right away. Don't touch it." His voice carried. A few heads at neighboring tables turned, almost involuntary, the way people look toward a sudden sound. "I want to understand something first. I told you medium rare. I was very clear. Do you not understand simple instructions, or do you just not care?" The woman across from him shifted in her seat. One of the suited men suddenly found his water glass fascinating. "I understand. And again, I'm so sorry for the error. The kitchen is. I don't want to hear about your kitchen." Craig leaned back in his chair, addressing the table now as much as her, performing. "This is exactly what I mean about this generation. No accountability. You make a mistake, and immediately it's someone else's fault. The kitchen made an error. And yet, somehow you're the one standing at my table." Lily kept her face neutral. She had learned to do this. Keep the face neutral. Keep the voice even. "You needed this job. Tuition was due in 6 weeks. I take full responsibility," she said. Let me have this remade immediately at no charge, and I'll personally make sure. Let me ask you something." Craig tilted his head, looking at her the way someone looks at a vending machine that's jammed. "What is it you actually do here, specifically? What is your function?" "I'm your server this evening." "Your server," he repeated the words like they tasted funny. "Because where I come from, a server serves. They get the order right. They don't come back with something that's wrong and then stand there asking for credit." He glanced at the other men at his table, who both found ways not to meet his eyes. "I've had better service at a food truck." And that was when Craig's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it. Something flickered across his face. Irritation, or something sharper than irritation. And he looked back up at Lily as if she were the reason for whatever was on that screen. "You know what?" he said, his voice dropping to something quieter and worse. "Why don't you go get your manager? Since clearly this is above your pay grade." Which, I'd imagine, he looked at her name tag, her uniform, performed a brief assessment, isn't very high. Before Lily could respond, the woman across from him said, quietly, "Craig, I think she's trying to." "Sandra." One word. The woman went quiet, and then something happened that nobody at Craig Ashworth's table anticipated. The man at the next table spoke. He hadn't been part of their world for the last 40 minutes. He'd been a peripheral presence, a single diner in a dark suit at a corner table, facing slightly away, his back partly to the room. He had a glass of red wine that he'd barely touched, a leather portfolio open beside his plate that he hadn't looked at in 20 minutes. He'd seemed, for all intents and purposes, to be somewhere else entirely. He wasn't. "She said she'd have it corrected," Marcus Vane said, without looking up from the portfolio. His voice was not loud. It was not aggressive. It had the particular quality of a voice that was accustomed to being the last one to speak in any given room, measured, low, carrying with a precision that made you aware of every word. Craig Ashworth blinked, turned, stared at the man at the corner table. "I'm sorry," Craig said. "She apologized. She offered to fix it. She's been trying to walk away from this table for the last 4 minutes." Now Marcus looked up. He set down his pen. He turned in his chair, slowly, the way you turn when you have all the time in the world. "Let her do her job." Craig's expression did something complicated. He looked at Marcus Vane, the quiet table, the single glass of wine, the suit that was somehow not flashy in a way that made it more expensive, the face that was calm in a way that was different from polite, and made the same miscalculation that a lot of people made when they first encountered Marcus Vane in civilian settings. He assumed he was dealing with someone at his level. "I appreciate the input, buddy," Craig said, his voice doing the thing it did when he wanted to diminish something. That particular warmth that was really condescension wearing a costume. "But this is between me and the staff here, so, my name isn't Buddy." Marcus picked up his wine glass, took a slow sip, set it down. "And you're making a scene in a restaurant where other people are trying to eat their dinner. Over a steak." A silence that had a different quality than the usual dinner noise settled over the immediate vicinity. Lily was still standing at the table. She had the plate in her hands now. She didn't move. Craig's jaw tightened. Besides, Sandra had gone very still. "Do you have any idea?" Craig said, with the careful patience of a man explaining something to someone he considered slow. "Who I am? I have lunch with the owner of this restaurant. I have drinks with Senator Parrish. I am a regional director at—" "I heard you," Marcus said. "You've been talking since you sat down." The two suited men at Craig's table had both shifted their chairs slightly back, as if by instinct, as if something about the next few minutes would be easier to observe from a small additional distance. Craig stood up. He had 4 inches on Marcus in terms of physical height, and the kind of social confidence that came from decades of being the biggest personality in most rooms he walked into. And he used both of these things now, pushing back his chair and standing up and looking down at the man, still seated at the corner table, with an expression that was supposed to end the conversation. "Why don't you mind your own business?" Craig said, each word distinct, "before this becomes something you regret." Marcus Vane looked up at him. And here is the thing about Marcus Vane that you need to understand. The thing that made the maitre go pale when he came around the corner from the host station and saw what was happening. The thing that made 2 of the servers in Lily's section quietly take a step back. the thing that made Sandra reach for her phone and put it in her purse and sit very, very still. Marcus Vane was 41 years old. He'd run the Vane organization for the last 11 years, since his father had a stroke on a Sunday morning in the middle of a meeting and never recovered. He controlled import and export operations across 7 states and had connections that reached into city government, federal contracting, and half the private security firms operating in the metropolitan area. He was not on any public list of powerful people. His name did not appear in business magazines. The people who knew his name really knew it, understood that this was by design, and that the design was deliberate and complete. None of this showed on his face. His face was composed. His expression was the expression of a man who was mildly curious about what would happen next. "Sit down," Marcus said. Craig laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, the laugh of a man who'd decided the other man was an idiot. "I'm sorry, you heard me, or what?" Craig spread his hands. "What exactly are you going to do?" "You're going to." And here he looked at Marcus, at the quiet table, the single diner, the almost full wine glass, and his voice went somewhere that sounded like contempt. "What? You're going to tell the manager on me?" Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He placed a card on the table. He slid it across with 2 fingers the way you'd slide a single playing card to someone across a poker table. Craig looked at it. Something moved behind his eyes. He picked it up. Read it again. The color changed in his face, not all at once, but in stages, the way a sky changes before a storm. The confidence in his posture, which had been his primary tool for most of his adult life, began to do something that confidence rarely does in men like Craig Ashworth. It left. Craig started. "You're going to sit down," Marcus said. "You're going to let her take the plate back. You're going to have it corrected. You're going to leave a tip that reflects the quality of service you've actually received, which has been excellent. And then you're going to go home." Lily was watching this. She wasn't sure she was breathing. The plate she was holding felt both very heavy and very far away. Craig Ashworth looked at the card in his hand. He looked at Marcus. He sat down. He did not say anything else. Marcus turned back to his portfolio, picked up his pen, looked at Lily. "I believe you were going to have that corrected," he said. His voice was perfectly even, the way it had been when this started. No performance in it, no satisfaction. "Yes," Lily managed. "Yes, sir, right away." She walked back toward the kitchen. Her hands were steady. She didn't know how. She brought out the corrected steak herself, medium rare. She stood at the pass and watched it come off the grill. She carried it herself. She set it down in front of Craig Ashworth without meeting his eyes. He cut into it without speaking. She asked if they needed anything else. He shook his head. She walked away. The rest of the dinner service was uneventful. Craig's table left 40 minutes later. He did not make eye contact with her when she brought the check. He did not make eye contact with the man at the corner table. He left a 22% tip. Lily cleared the table afterward, stacking the plates with the mechanical efficiency of someone running on adrenaline, still metabolizing in her bloodstream. When she picked up the billfold and counted the tips, she stood there for a moment, doing math in her head, thinking about what had just happened, and being unable to quite process it in a way that made sense. She went back to her other tables. She refilled waters. She brought dessert menus. She did her job. At 9:47, she noticed that the corner table had been settled. The portfolio was gone. The wine glass, still mostly full, had been cleared. Marcus Vane had left at some point in the last 20 minutes quietly, the way he'd apparently arrived. She found an envelope under his wine glass when she cleared the table. Inside was a card. Not the same card he'd shown Craig Ashworth, a different one, plain, just a name and a phone number in clean sans serif type, and a handwritten note on the back, for handling that with more grace than it deserved. MV, and beneath the envelope, folded in half, a cash tip that when she counted it later in the staff bathroom made her press both hands against her face and stint with her eyes closed for a very long time. She didn't call the number. She carried the card in the inside pocket of her bag for 11 days, which she would later identify as the period where she still thought she had a choice about any of it. She thought about it while she studied. She thought about it between classes. She thought about it in the particular way you think about something. When you're trying to tell yourself, You're not thinking about it. She'd looked up the name, of course. Marcus Vane. There wasn't much. A few business registrations, a real estate holding company, some charitable foundation connected to a hospital expansion. The kind of digital footprint that was suspiciously clean for a man of what appeared to be substantial means. She was a nursing student. She understood what a clean chart sometimes meant. She was not naive. She understood, in the abstract, what the look on Craig Ashworth's face had meant when he'd read that card. She understood that the man who'd sat quietly at that corner table was not, in any recognizable civilian sense, a quiet man. But she also remembered the note on the back of the card, the tip that had covered her tuition shortfall, which she'd absolutely not been going to use, and which she'd then spent 3 days arguing with herself about before depositing into her account, because rent existed and guilt was a luxury she currently couldn't afford. For handling that with more grace than it deserved. She called the number on day 12. A woman answered, professional, warm, the voice of someone who managed a significant volume of calls and was very good at it. She asked for Lily's name. She put her on hold for perhaps 90 seconds. When she came back, she had a time and an address and asked if 3 o'clock on Thursday worked. Lily said yes before she'd fully processed what she was agreeing to. The address was an office building in the Meridian district. Old brick, renovated interior, the kind of building that had been something else in a previous century and wore its history with a certain architectural dignity. The office on the 14th floor had large windows and bookshelves, and no logo visible anywhere. A serious-looking woman in her 40s checked Lily's ID at reception with the brisk efficiency of someone who did not find this step unnecessary. Marcus Vane came out to meet her in the lobby himself, which she later understood was unusual. He was taller than she'd registered at the restaurant. Or the context was different. There he'd been seated, and the scale of that room had been different, and she'd been holding a plate. Here, standing in the lobby of this quiet building on a Thursday afternoon, he seemed to occupy space differently. He was wearing a charcoal jacket, no tie, and he moved with an economy of motion that suggested someone who never wasted physical effort. "Mrs. Chen," he said. He offered his hand. "Mr. Vane." She shook it. He led her back to the office. He offered her coffee, which she declined. He sat across from her at a low table by the windows rather than behind the desk, which she registered as a deliberate choice. "You didn't call for 11 days, he said. Not accusatory, observational. I was thinking about it. And what did you conclude? That the card was probably not a standing offer, she said, and that you'd likely have an interesting reason for giving it." He looked at her with something that wasn't quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "My sister came into Rosewood for a dinner about 6 weeks ago, sat in your section. She had a difficult situation. She'd come there with someone. The evening went wrong. She ended up sitting alone for the last half of it. She told me that her server handled it beautifully, checked in without hovering, made her feel like a person rather than an inconvenience, brought her dessert and said it was on the house and that the chocolate lava cake would fix whatever wasn't fixed by tomorrow morning." He paused. "She remembered your name." Lily was quiet for a moment. She remembered that night. Margot, she'd thought the woman's name was, though she'd never gotten a last name. Mid-30s, beautiful, clearly holding something difficult together behind her eyes. The dessert had been Lily's own call. It had cost her $6 out of her own pocket, which she'd tucked into the register at the end of her shift without telling anyone. "How is she?" Lily said. Marcus looked at her. "Your sister," Lily said. "Is she okay?" A beat. Then something shifted, briefly, in his expression. Something that he controlled almost immediately, but that she caught the way you catch a glimpse of something moving just at the edge of your vision. "She's better," he said. Lily nodded. She looked down at her hands and then back up. "You came to the restaurant that night looking for me," she said. "Not incidentally. I wanted to see for myself." "See what?" "Whether you were someone I could trust." The room was quiet. Outside the window, the city moved in its ordinary afternoon rhythms. "And Craig Ashworth," she said, "happened to be there." Marcus picked up his coffee cup, set it down. "Though I'd be lying if I said I was displeased by it." Lily looked at him, at the face that was composed and the eyes that were more complicated than the face suggested. At the man who had, with the quiet authority of someone who operated in a register most people never encountered, ended something that she'd been standing in the middle of with no real way out. "What is it you actually want?" she said. "There's a community health clinic in the Eastfield neighborhood," he said. "The Vane Foundation funds it. We're expanding the pediatric wing, doubling capacity. The clinic director is good at medicine and terrible at operations. I need someone to serve as a patient liaison during the expansion, bridge between the medical staff, the families they serve, and my team managing the construction timeline." He looked at her. "Your school has a clinical partnership program. I've already spoken to your department chair. The position would qualify for practicum credit." Lily stared at him. "You spoke to my department chair." "With discretion," he said. "No pressure. If you're not interested," she has no idea why the conversation happened. "When did you have time to?" She stopped. 11 days ago. You did this in 11 days. I had the information in 5, he said, without apparent embarrassment. I waited to see if you'd call. Lily was quiet for a long moment. "What happens?" she said, carefully. "If I say no?" "You leave," he said. "I have someone drive you back, wherever you need to go. You go back to your life and your shifts at Rosewood, and nothing about our interaction changes anything for you. And if I say yes? You help build something that matters in a neighborhood that needs it," he said. "You get credit toward your degree, and you work with people who are very good at what they do." He paused. "And you will be safe." "That's not a condition. It's a fact. Anyone in my world will know you're under my protection. No one will bother you. No one will use your proximity to me to their advantage. That's not how I operate." Lily looked at the window, at the city outside. She thought about Margot at that corner table 6 weeks ago, holding herself together with the specific dignity of a woman who was not going to cry in a restaurant. She thought about the card and the note and the chocolate lava cake and $6 out of her own pocket. She thought about Eastfield. She knew Eastfield. She'd done a rotation there in her second semester. She knew exactly how full that pediatric waiting room got on a Friday afternoon. "I have class Tuesday and Thursday mornings," she said, "and I'd need to keep at least one shift at Rosewood until—" "Understood," he said, "and I want to be able to talk to the clinic director directly, without the information being filtered. That's exactly what we need you to do." She looked back at him, at the man who had the power to make Craig Ashworth sit down with 2 words, who had arranged all of this with the quiet precision of someone accustomed to solving problems before they were asked to, who had a sister who'd sat alone at a restaurant table, and whom a stranger had thought to bring a chocolate lava cake. "Okay," Lily Chen said. Marcus Vane nodded once. He reached across and offered his hand again. She shook it. She started on Monday. The Eastfield Clinic occupied a converted 2-story building on Marsh Avenue that smelled like antiseptic and old wood and the particular hopeful smell of an institution that is doing its best. Dr. Priya Reeves, the clinic director, was a 53-year-old woman who had the harried energy of someone managing 7 things simultaneously and the eyes of someone who had been doing this long enough to have stopped being surprised by anything human beings did. She shook Lily's hand for approximately 1 second and then led her immediately into a meeting that had already started. Lily liked her instantly. The expansion was complicated. The construction timeline was aggressive. The pediatric waitlist was long and getting longer. The Vane Foundation people, 3 project managers who came and went and tailored everything and spoke in quarterly targets, and the medical staff existed in separate operational universes that had never been successfully introduced and seemed mildly hostile to the idea. Lily spent her first 3 days listening. She sat in on staff meetings and construction briefings and family intake sessions. She took notes. She didn't offer opinions. She learned the building, where the drafts came from, which waiting room chair had the wobbly leg that needed to be mentioned to the right person, which of the front desk staff were the actual centers of institutional knowledge. Marcus checked in on Friday afternoon, not with a meeting, with a text. "How is it?" She thought about it for a moment, standing in the parking lot of the clinic with the November wind making the serious argument it always made in that neighborhood. "Complicated," she wrote back. "Important. I'll figure it out." "I know," he replied. She pocketed her phone and went back inside. It was 2 weeks later, a Thursday evening, when things shifted. Lily was the last one still working in the administrative wing. Dr. Reeves had gone home at 8. The construction crew had packed up at 6. The front desk had closed at 5. She was cross-referencing the appointment backlog against the new capacity projections, a task that was less glamorous than it sounded and considerably more important. When she heard the door at the end of the hallway, she heard voices, 2 of them, male, low, moving with the particular quiet of people who did not want to be heard. She sat very still. The voices moved through the hallway toward the back office where the Foundation's project files were stored. She heard the sound of a door opening, the sound of drawers. Lily Chen was 22 years old and 5'3" in her work flats, and was not, in any tactical sense, prepared for this situation. But she was also the person who had stood in front of Craig Ashworth's table for 4 minutes holding a plate and kept her face neutral and her voice even, which is a different kind of prepared, and it turned out to be the kind that mattered. She picked up her phone. She called the number she had for Marcus's office. He answered himself, which, again, she later understood was unusual. She said quietly, the address and the words, 2 people in the back office who shouldn't be here. She heard him say something away from the phone, 1 sentence, to someone else in the room. Then back to her, stay where you are, do not engage, someone will be there in 4 minutes. She stayed where she was. It was 3 minutes and 50 seconds. The 2 men were still in the back office when the 3 people arrived who Marcus had sent. Professional, quiet, efficient, in the specific way that told you they had done this particular kind of work before. The situation was resolved without anyone raising a voice. Marcus arrived 11 minutes after that. He came through the front door in the same coat he'd been wearing the night at the restaurant, and he walked through the clinic with the manner of someone conducting a routine inspection, checking corners, glancing at windows, until he reached the administrative wing, where Lily was still sitting at the desk with her laptop open and the appointment spreadsheet on the screen. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at her for a moment, in the way of someone running an assessment and finding the results satisfactory. You called immediately, he said. You said to. Some people wouldn't have. He came into the room. He sat down in the chair across from her, the same geometry as the meeting in his office 2 weeks ago, the same low-distance directness. Are you all right? Yes, she said. And then, who were they? He told her. The specifics were more complicated than she needed and less complicated than she'd feared. A business situation, he said, with a group that had interests in the building before the Foundation acquired it, and who apparently felt that certain files might be persuasive leverage in an ongoing dispute. Are they going to come back? She said. No. Flat. Final. The way he said it made the word into a complete document. Lily nodded. She looked at the spreadsheet. She looked back at him. The appointment backlog is worse than the projection model accounts for, she said. I've been running the numbers. If we don't add a second intake coordinator before the new wing opens, we're going to have a bottleneck that'll undermine the whole capacity expansion. Marcus looked at her. It's in the summary I'm sending Dr. Reeves tomorrow, Lily said. But I thought you should know. A silence. Then something crossed his face. Not quite the thing she'd seen when she'd asked about his sister, but in the same family. Something that was surprise and wasn't. Something that looked like it might take years to fully understand. I'll have my team address it, he said. She nodded, started to close her laptop. Lily, she looked up. What I said in the office, he said. About being safe. About protection. He held her gaze. That's not contingent on anything. It doesn't matter what you decide to do next. With the clinic, with any of this. You are not alone in this city. The clinic was quiet around them. The November wind was making its argument against the windows. Somewhere in the building, a clock ticked in the specific way clocks do in buildings that have been listening to people try for a long time. Lily Chen looked at Marcus Vane, at the man who had walked into a restaurant and recognized something worth protecting before he'd ever spoken a word to her, who had built a thing in a neighborhood that needed it, and who had stood in a doorway 4 minutes ago with something in his face that she was only now beginning to have language for. I know, she said, and the thing was, she meant it. The pediatric wing opened in March. Lily was there for the ribbon cutting. standing beside Dr. Reeves, who looked at the full waiting room with the expression of someone who had spent 20 years working toward exactly this and was not sure what to do with having arrived. Marcus was there too, though not at the front. He stood near the back of the room, the way he stood everywhere, quietly, present, aware. He didn't make a speech. His name wasn't on the press release. This was also by design. When the official part ended and the room dissolved into the particular warm chaos of a children's health clinic on an open-door day, Lily found him by the window. "It's good work," he said. "It is," she said. Outside, on Marsh Avenue, a family was arriving. A mother with two small children, the younger being carried, the older one holding the door with the absorbed seriousness of a child given a real job to do. "The appointment coordinator starts Monday," Marcus said. "Per your recommendation." "I know. I trained her." He turned to look at her. In the afternoon light of the window and the noise of the clinic around them, he was exactly what he'd always been, complicated and direct and more careful than he appeared. "My sister wants to meet you," he said. "Properly. She's asked 3 times. Lily smiled. "Tell Margot I said hi." He looked at her. "She paid with a credit card that night," Lily said. The name was on the receipt. A pause. "I'm a detail person." Something crossed his face then that she'd been waiting, without quite knowing she was waiting, to see. Something that opened rather than closed. Something that looked very much like the beginning of trust given, and not only kept. "Thursday," he said. "Dinner, the 4 of us. Not Rosewood. Somewhere the background music is reasonable," she said. "And the steak doesn't come out the wrong temperature. I'll find somewhere adequate," Marcus Vane said. And Lily Chen laughed. Actually laughed, full and bright in the room full of children and possibility. And a neighborhood that was, slowly, becoming more than it had been. And he stood there in the afternoon light, looking at her laugh with the expression of a man discovering, somewhat against his expectations, that some things in this life are exactly what they appear to be. "So here's what I want to ask you, and I want you to really think about this before you answer. When was the last time someone stood up for you? Not because they had to, not because there was something in it for them, just because they saw something happening and decided it wasn't right." Lily Chen spent 11 days carrying a card in her bag, arguing with herself about what kind of person Marcus Vane was and whether she was the kind of person who called numbers like that. And the answer turned out to be yes. She was exactly that kind of person, and so was he. If this story hit something for you, drop it in the comments. Tell us what you think about Lily. Tell us what you think about Marcus. Tell us if you've ever been in that restaurant, holding that plate, keeping your face neutral, while someone talked to you like you were invisible. And if you're new here, welcome to Mia's Romance Library. Hit subscribe and stay a while. We've got plenty more where this came from. See you in the next one.